Okay, so now we can move on to the election of 1820. And when you look at America by 1820, certainly the nation is largely unified. See very little support for anybody other than Mr. Monroe. Just a sea of green for the Democrat Republicans. That's one of the factors that leads to this being known as the era of good feelings, despite some of the problems that were occurring. Okay, so in the West, you have 9 new states that joined the Union between 1791 and 1819. Most had been admitted alternatively as free and then slave states. And the goal here, of course, is to maintain a sectional balance in Congress. This was a major goal of Congress. Obviously, the House of Representatives gets thrown a bit out of whack because Southern states get the 3/5 compromise, allowing them to count a portion of their slave population. But in the Senate, you have this balance that they try to uphold, just to kind of keep the anger down over slavery. There had been a lot of movement towards the West. We discussed a little bit of this last week. There was cheap lands in Ohio, and those lands are going to attract thousands of European immigrants, as well as people who are just kind of being squeezed out of the East Coast as it's growing, and there's less opportunities. A lot of the land had been exhausted in older tobacco states. That's going to drive people westward. And by the way, tobacco was extremely, extremely harsh on the soil, not nearly as harsh as cotton would be. Speculators accepted small down payments and made the purchase of land much easier. And the economic depression that resulted from the embargo of 1807 helped push a lot of people westward as well. And of course, the natives had been defeated at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and so it kind of, as far as the northwest portion goes, you're not going to have the issue of Native Americans finding conflict with the white settlers due to that defeat. The transportation revolution improved land routes to the Ohio Valley. The Cumberland Road started in 1811, and it went from Maryland to Illinois. The invention of the steamboat in 1811 made upstream travel possible instead of always having to go downstream. And of course, in 1826, you have the canals beginning, and that's going to allow for increased trade between the East and the West. All right, so the Missouri Compromise. Missouri asked Congress to enter the Union in 1819, and this obviously is going to lead to a debate within Congress. And one congressman, Mr. Talmadge, called for the end of slavery in Missouri. And we took a look at this last week. It was kind of a gradual emancipation. Calls for the non-importation of slaves into Missouri, gradual emancipation of children born to slave parents already there. And the results of this, now this is obviously following the model that had been used in many northern states. The results are that it's going to terrify Southerners because it's going to open the door to limiting slavery. And that's just kind of the thing. They don't want the government to get into that beyond the importation ban that had, we're past that 1808 ban on importation of slaves. They don't want to see any further action taken to curb slavery because there's a growing need for slaves with the invention of the cotton gin. All right, so we mentioned this last week. Henry Clay worked on negotiating a compromise. Congress would admit Missouri as a slave state. Maine was carved out of Massachusetts to be a new free state, and it's going to keep the sectional balance at 12 slave, 12 free for about the next 15 years. Future slavery was prohibited north of the 3630 latitude-longitude lines, which is going to be the southern border of Missouri. Ironically, Missouri was north of that line. The Talmadge Amendment was left out of the final bill. That failed. Clay's compromise kind of saved the day on this. So with the Missouri Compromise, what you're going to see is that there's going to be no new slavery above this line. I hope my cursor is showing up here on the recording. There's going to be no new slavery above this line aside from Missouri and what already exists. That kind of solves, or largely solves, the crisis. People on both sides kind of accepted it. The South, they got what they wanted. Missouri could be a slave state. The North won the concession that it could forbade slavery in the remaining territories above the 3630 line. All right, and also the North had an advantage as Spanish territory in the Southwest prevented significant Southern expansion westward. Southerners were not too concerned about lands north of 3630 line since the climate was not really conducive to cash crop agriculture requiring slave labor. So that means that north of that line, most of these states that are involved in agriculture, it would kind of fall on that old New England model. It's going to be largely subsistence agriculture rather than large cash crop productions of things like tobacco or cotton. The legacy of this compromise, of course, it's going to last 34 years. It's going to preserve the Union until the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. We'll get to that eventually. But also, something very important is that slavery, this thing on the back burner, this thing that was buried, it was buried in the Declaration of Independence when Jefferson had to remove reference to the evil slave trade. It was sidestepped at the Constitutional Convention when they compromised on counting slaves. And the best they could do in the Constitution was ban the importation of slaves after a certain year. Slavery is now going to become a dominant issue in American politics, and it's important to consider that, especially when you're talking about the era of good feelings. Is this really an era of good feelings when you have so many disagreements going on in American society? And a lot of people debate the extent that it really was an era of good feelings. It's going to be a serious setback to national unity. And so what we're going to see happening over the next couple of months is this major, next few weeks is this major buildup to what everybody knows is coming, the Civil War. The South is going to start to develop its own form of sectional nationalism, Southern versus Northern. And so you really have a great sea of a lot of different things coming together now, where everybody is kind of pulling apart from each other. Even though the era of good feelings indicates everybody's coming together, they're coming together in a lot of ways, especially economically, but there's a lot of fractures in the foundation. All right, so what you should do now, after enduring about 23 minutes of this recording, make a list of the issues that existed that indicate that the era of good feelings was anything but an era of good feelings. So you're largely evaluating the problems that existed under this title. And a lot of textbooks, especially in lower grades, really gloss this over and indicate that everything's fine, there's political unity, we've gotten past the Democrat-Republican versus the Federalist, and it's just a wonderful time in America. In actuality, it's largely short-lived, and there's a lot of problems bubbling under the surface that are going to become far more apparent in the future decades as you move forward. Okay, so make the list. Make sure you understand the things that you put on the list, because this is going to help you in writing your essays. Okay, the topic of your essay will relate to the era of good feelings.